It's Foolishness Friday, and I was first reluctant to invite this gentleman on because it's foolishness. And how could I bring a man of God into this mess that we have on a Friday? I just didn't feel right about it. But he said he could handle it. And then I saw his birthday, and I said, we all right. Got the same daggone birthday as mine. Let me welcome to the show. He's an activist and author, talk show host himself, Pastor Bishop Talbert W. Swan II. Welcome to the Karen Hunter Show.
Thanks for having me. Good to be here.
Look at you. Are you gonna wear the glasses the whole?
I might.
Huh? What is? Do you have? Did you get your pupils dilated today? What is going on?
A little keratoconus in here.
You had a what? What?
Keratoconus.
What is that?
It's a condition.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. Now I feel bad.
That's all
Slightly.
right. Don't treat me like I'm disabled. I'm
okay.
all right.
All right, Bishop. So I've been following you on the Twitters. Cousin Sill's here.
Most definitely.
And you've been I talk about the smoke I give, but Lord have mercy, people's eyebrows are singed off messing with you on Twitter. People try to comfort you, and they aren't heard from again. And it's amazing. And I love your comebacks. I love what you talk about, what you stand for. It gives me life.
Oh, I'm just on there having a conversation and putting out there some things about what I believe in. And every now and then, I got to swat some flies and maggots out the way.
So let me ask you. I want to start off because I want to talk about Mark Lamont Hill. And you tweeted out something about it, so I know you're prepared to talk about it. This brother got fired yesterday from CNN. It's not his only job. He's a professor. He owns a bookstore in Philadelphia. Right. He's a very accomplished, successful brother. He's an author as well. So it's not, I don't think this check is going to break him.
Right.
But it does speak to a certain precarious nature when you're in speaking truth or speaking your truth. And you also take paychecks from other people, other sources that aren't generated from you.
Sure.
And they can do whatever they want. It's their company. CNN owns their company, just like SiriusXM owns this one. But there should be some balance in how things are judged. And I heard the speech that he gave at the UN. I don't think he called for anything violent or anything that was off message, per se. I think he spoke truth. He doesn't have his job there anymore. This is the same company that hired Hugh Hewitt and would give billions of dollars of hours to Donald Trump while he was on a campaign trail saying really horrific, damaging things.
And who still has Rick Santorum on payroll?
Okay. So tell me how we should be looking at this, Bishop.
Well, I'm appalled at what happened to Mark. In terms of CNN's response and with the quickness that they responded as well. CNN has been showing incessantly pictures of kids and women at the border and talking about Trump tear gassing them and how horrific that has been. They talk about the wall and all of that. And yet here Mark is talking about a real life situation in Palestine, in Israel, where there actually is a wall and where the military is not tear gassing. They're using real bullets and taking the lives of Palestinians. And he's calling for peace and a peaceful solution where Palestinians can have full citizenship in Israel. And because
they don't right now.
Absolutely. And the misnomer that Israel is a democracy has the whole world fooled, but that's a whole nother subject. And then because he uses this phrase, from the river to the sea, which some ascribe to Hamas and other alleged terrorist groups, that gets him canned from CNN. And that was hardly the context in which he used that phrase. I mean, we know that the natural borders of Israel are from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea. And so if he's talking about a completely free Israel, he's talking about border to border, Palestinians and Israelis living together in unity together. Right. That was the context of Mark's speech. And then to misconstrue that he meant the extermination of Israel is mind-boggling.
But it happened, right? And there's no recourse because he wasn't even given an opportunity to explain his statement, right? So I think there's a larger question because when I saw that, I sat up I'm like, what? You could just summarily just fire somebody without any nothing. Yeah, yes, you can.
Mm-hmm.
But what does it say to people when we talk about freedom of speech, for example, right? So, even if Mark said those things, which he didn't, out of context, right? Do we not have the right to our opinion on certain things? And then, like, where's the line drawn? Because there's some horrific things said on a regular basis on all of these networks.
Absolutely. And the irony of it is, this is on the heels of CNN going to court to sue the president for taking Jim Acosta's pass away, and then agreeing wholeheartedly with the judge who basically said his right to freedom of speech was likely violated. So here you are championing free speech, and then on the heels of that, you're telling this black man that he doesn't really have the right to free speech, or he has it, but he can't remain on their network if he exercises it. And so there's a dichotomy that exists there in terms of how CNN is treating one situation versus treating another.
There was a young man named Shermichael Singleton who used to host and co-host with our Armstrong Williams on 126, and he worked with Ben Carson at HUD. Right, he's a Republican young man. Actually, Forbes just named him one of the 30 under 30. Really accomplished, brilliant gentleman. He wrote a piece in The Hill when Donald Trump was running for president in October of 2016, and he said, as an African American, like so many of my peers, I'm concerned about the police brutality, the lack of economic and educational opportunities for our urban cities, and the complete disregard for criminal justice reform. Hearing the nominee of my party ignore these harsh truths and opt for words like law and order sounds like a coded message from an era in our history that should stay in the past. And he goes on to talk about, the discourse and the vitriol. And he was hired by Ben Carson. And then when it was found out that this piece ran after Donald Trump won, he was fired. And all he was calling for was civility and a lack of, understanding about our community and and instead of saying, wow, okay, let us do something about this, they fire him. So time after time, and I can go through a lot of cases where people lose their jobs for speaking their truth. I've called on this air for us to simultaneously, while we work in jobs, to also build our own economies, right? I think that's super important.
Sure.
Especially when it's so easily, taken away from you. And that insecurity makes us stay quiet. There are people still working for these outlets that know that now there's a third rail that they can't touch. Or maybe they, can't get close to it. Every day, I speak straight from here. I don't know. And I say, I don't know how it's going to be perceived. I do imagine at some point somebody driving around getting in their feelings about something that I'm saying and, and have the power to do something about it, right?
It happens all the time. I mean, I've experienced it so many times where grants have been taken and opportunities have been denied, even has trickled down to how people handle my children. I remember my son couldn't get a job at a certain college because the person who was in charge of hiring for that position said that this Bishop Swan, so no way in hell he's going to get this job. And so that happens all of the time by us exercising our right to free speech. But what people really want now is they want a tribal mentality where everybody walks in lockstep with the prescribed talking points. Nobody gets off message. Everybody stays right where they are unless they risk losing their livelihood, their reputation, opportunities being blocked for them. And so you speak your mind and you speak your truth at your own peril. And unfortunately, that's the reality that we live in right now.
866-801-8255. We're here with Bishop Swan. And maybe you can tell us the difference between a bishop and just a regular pastor. I don't really know. How do you become a bishop?
Well, in our denomination, Church of God in Christ, we're the largest Pentecostal denomination in America. Pastors oversee churches, and we have our geographical areas are split into what we call jurisdictions, which encompass a number of churches, and then the administrative head over jurisdictions are bishops. They're members of the episcopacy, and so they're selected by our 12-man general board, our presiding bishop, and consecrated as bishops. So in a nutshell, that's in my denomination, that's how it happens.
Go ahead, Sil.
No. I was listening to both of you, and I think about it less when I'm here at Sirius XM when I'm doing the show. What I say, how it will be perceived, because there is a bit of freedom of speech. It feels like that more here. But in the corporate space that I walk in when I leave here, I'm always thinking about it, especially on Twitter. Even sometimes when I retweet some of the things that other people say, including you. Some of the things that you have said about, and very recently I retweeted something out that you said about white women and their voting practices and their voting principles.
At your own risk.
Yeah, and I knew when I sent that out, I thought about it. I don't just read these things. I read things or I think things and I tweet them out. Or when I go to retweet something, I think about it and I say to myself, am I prepared for what could possibly happen if I walk into my office environment and somebody says, we saw what you tweeted, it became a problem, or somebody called based on, something that they read online about your profile, and whether or not that could disrupt my economy. So it is definitely, it's important to be, number one, in control of our voices, but always be prepared with what could happen when we begin to exercise them. And it's really unfortunate, but what I think they all fall back on, all these corporate entities fall back on, is that employment is at will. And if employment is at will, when they're ready for it to no longer be at their will, they will let you go.
No matter how valuable you are.
No matter how valuable you are.
I keep going back to Montgomery. That bus company went bankrupt. It was not in their best interest to keep that going, yet they refused to capitulate. And they went bankrupt, and the parent company had to come in and say enough. Mm-hmm. So people are willing to cut off their noses to spite their faces to make a point about what your place is in the world and where you should be, even at their own detriment. And racism is at the detriment of white people.
Absolutely.
Fundamentally.
We've all got to get to a point where we make a decision. What are we willing to risk? And that really says it all. What am I willing to risk? What am I willing to lose? And how would I fare if I did? And so when you step out there and on a limb and you speak your truth, you've got to understand that there may be consequences. I've been banned from Twitter. I was permanently banned.
Oh, but I saw you. When was this?
This was back in August.
Okay, but you're back.
Yeah.
That wasn't so permanent.
I was permanently banned, and then
what got you permanently banned?
Well, someone tweeted to me that I should follow Candace Owens, and I said no, thank you. I'm on a no coon diet.
I saw that too. I remember.
What's wrong with that?
Yeah, well, they thought that was enough to permanently ban me. Of course, that it was aided by literally thousands of right wingers complaining or filing reports on that tweet, and so they decided to permanently ban me. But they didn't expect for literally thousands of my followers to come back and do a petition campaign and call and do all that kind of stuff to try to get me back on. So you do risk losing some things, and that's just something small in terms of being banned from Twitter. But I'm talking about finances, jobs, opportunities, contracts. All of that stuff you can use by speaking truth.
Okay. So as you're talking, 4 generations you are a pastor, 4 generations of pastors, right? We're going to have this whole conversation about God.
Okay.
Not about God, about religion and how religion has enslaved so many of us, right? The notion of people using scripture to bind other people and themselves, right?
Sure.
And 4 generations in, why did you decide to continue the legacy of being a pastor? What is it about this mission of yours that is so important?
It was a real compulsion that I had in calling on my life, perhaps a combination of something divine and how I was raised that really tugged on me in terms of ministry, but also I've always been drawn to social action and social justice, and I always looked at ministry and social justice as 2 sides of the same coin, and so it was just kind of a natural fit for who I was, the family I came out of, and what I aspired to do.
We're talking with Bishop Swan II, Bishop Talbert W. Swan II. He brought his lovely wife with him too. I appreciate that, First Lady. Hey, how you doing? As I think about this, you referred to Candace as a coon, right? Some would say Jesus wouldn't do that.
Mhm.
What would you say to that?
Well, I always tell people when they say, you should speak like Jesus and you should be more like Jesus. And I say, so I come back at them with some terms that Jesus used. And I said, well, Jesus called folks hypocrites, brood of vipers. I mean, he said they were like sepulchres, white and shiny on the outside, but inside full of dead men bones. I mean, Jesus said some harsh stuff about folks. I'm saying I got no problem with talking to you like Jesus talked to you, because what they've done is they've sanitized Jesus and they've whitenized Jesus, and they've come up with this version of this hippie, holding hands and throwing out flowers, singing "We Are the World." But the Christ that I follow is black Jesus with dreads who's flipping over tables. So we fundamentally have two completely different viewpoints of who Christ was.
How did that happen, right? So if Jesus is Jesus, how do we get to a place where we serve two different gods, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we do serve two different gods in this country. People who call themselves evangelicals do not serve the same God that I do, and I don't believe you do.
I don't believe they serve God.
I agree with that.
Go there.
I agree, but they think that they do, right? They believe that they do.
They serve their God. We look at it through a different hermeneutical lens. We interpret Christ differently based upon our reading of Scripture, based upon our experiences, based upon our values. And so I wrote a book, No More Cursing. And in one of the chapters, it says, "Will the real Jesus please stand up?" And it talks about how you had the slave master on the plantation who worshiped Jesus, but they could lynch a black man on Saturday night and get up and praise Jesus on Sunday morning. And then you had the slave who looked at Jesus through a completely different lens, not the Jesus that the slave master taught them about, the one who says, slaves be obedient to your masters, but they looked at the one who desired for them to be free. And then they would sing about master in code, and they would sing stuff like everybody talking about heaven ain't going there. And he thought he had some happy Negroes, but they were really talking about their hypocrisy. The whole story of Nat Turner is the transformation of somebody who was handpicked to control black people through the gospel, through preaching of the gospel, who all of a sudden got a revelation about what this really was saying about his people and completely flipped the script on them. And our life experience.
Then Mark Vesey founded an AME church. Mother Emanuel actually is his church in South Carolina.
Absolutely. And was going to lead a slave revolt there in South Carolina until a snitch told on him. And foiled the plan. But, so I see Jesus through the lens of an oppressed people. It was a book by James Cone that forever changed my life called God of the Oppressed. And my mantra is any authentic theology must affirm that God is on the side of the oppressed.
So, guys.
No. While you were talking, I'm thinking about the value system and the oppressing that we have suffered at the hands of others, but then that we adopt and use to oppress one another. While you were talking, I was thinking about Reverend Jasper Williams, who did the eulogy at Aretha Franklin's funeral.
He had to hang his head.
You just dropped your head.
His head in shame for the man.
But what do we do? What do you do when you see, men of the cloth, and we talk about our value system, we talk about, the things that we need to challenge, that we are doing to ourselves. How do you address that from your vantage point, from where you sit? Because we are at a time when that imagery cannot go forward. And I've worshiped at churches like that I've had to leave, and as a young girl didn't know why this doesn't work for me anymore. But as a now almost 42-year-old woman saying that's what I was walking away from, as ministers or as pastors in the cloth, like how do you address that amongst your own community?
Well, first let me say that every church and every preacher is not for everybody. So there's a searching that goes on with individuals in terms of what what fits for them. So I've had people walk away from our church because in their minds, Bishop Swan is too political. I'm not looking for this. And so I respect people's choice to do that.
Mm-hmm.
But I think preachers have to, one, they have to understand the audience, the constituents that they're either reaching or serving or that they're trying to reach. Two, they have to make their message relevant to contemporary times. It's wonderful to tell me about the 3 Hebrew boys and Daniel in the lion's den, but if you can't connect that to how it applies to my life right now and what's happening right now, then I'm just telling stories and giving them fables and parables that are not really relevant to their everyday living. And then timing is important. You've got to know when is the right time to challenge people, because people do need to be challenged. And so everything that comes out of the preacher's mouth is not going to be fluff or nutter. It's not going to make them feel good. Some things are going to be tough to swallow and challenging. And then when to encourage and to uplift. And I think the message of Reverend Jasper Williams, that was, the timing was so off, on that message, with the entire world watching.
So the Holy Spirit didn't bubble up?
Well, I can't answer for him. I just know that if it were me, I would know that a funeral in front of the entire world was not the time to slap black folks around. I would have picked a much more encouraging.
But did you
word.
think what he said was correct? And
No,
it was just the wrong time?
It was not just the wrong time. I think there was a lot of what he said that I had issues with.
But at the same time, there is a morality conversation that should be had, right?
Sure.
That we're not having. So there's two things going on right now. I think people want to absolve themselves from any responsibility to be moral, whatever that means.
Sure.
They want to redefine what it means to be moral. They want to redefine where that compass should be because they don't want to necessarily live up to the standard.
Absolutely.
Right?
Right.
And at the same time, there's harsh judgment, right, of people who are wagging their finger in people's faces and not doing things in love.
Mm-hmm.
So we're in some strange times, not just politically, not just racially, but spiritually. I think this is a period where I joke about the seventh seal or, seal being open, like that's but I'm not really joking because I do feel in my spirit we're coming close to something. And there are some of us who are positioned to actually speak to it, who know it intimately and can prepare people for what's about to happen. But I think we're in a space where we're afraid to talk and then we say too much.
Right.
At the same time. It's strange.
Absolutely. And I think we can't be afraid to talk, can't be afraid to challenge. I mean, even the same way that I challenge the broader society on racial oppression, I challenge my own community, in terms of them turning a blind eye to some of the things that happen in our own neighborhoods.
Let's deal with that. Like, give me a couple of, for instances.
Yeah, well, I say, listen, as much as it's problematic for police to be in our neighborhoods profiling us and the way that they respond to young black men and black folks in general, it's also problematic when you know that Pookie is slinging drugs and has got a gun in the house, but because he's bringing in a little bit of extra cheddar, you turn a blind eye and act like he's not doing what he's doing. And you don't know how many times, folks have come. I had the NAACP in my area, and people will come seeking help, and they'll come pretending like their baby was an angel and they were anything but. And we've got to be realistic in terms of what we are allowing to happen in our own homes, first of all,
Right.
and then in our neighborhoods. And we can't push every problem and every issue in our community off to racial oppression, to the man, to the police, and everybody else.
866-801-8255. We're talking with Pastor Talbert W. Swan II. Where do we go from here? Where we are right now, I know you're on Twitter slaying the trolls, but
Baptizing them
in the blood
by fire.
Yeah. But how do we overcome this, right? So my thing is always, I want us to be empowered. I need us to have our money right, get our health right, not depend on this government, not depend on people to get from point A to point B. And I need our churches. If you have a church, I'm saying, if you have a church, your block should be clean. There shouldn't be a liquor store, church, liquor store, church. There shouldn't be poverty. You're driving in a Bentley. Everybody's driving in a Pinto. There shouldn't be this whole massive amounts of discourse. If you're pastoring a church in a neighborhood, 5 blocks around you should be fire, and good fire.
Sure.
Good economy.
Absolutely. I think one, you're right on point. 2, we've got to look at a holistic approach to how we deal with the social ills that plague us. So we deal externally with those things that on the outside that are affecting our communities, but simultaneously we have to deal with what's on the inside. So we've got to deal with financial literacy, making sure people know how to manage their money, know how to start a business. We've got to deal with health issues. With us being disciplined enough to take care of our own health. I'm tired of preaching funerals of people who die of things that were preventable. Yes. We've got to teach people how to take care of their children. We've got to deal with relationships, tell people, how to stay together, how to raise a family. We've got to deal with all of that stuff internally while we fight the things that happen externally, because if we're not doing that, if racism dries up and goes away tomorrow, it doesn't solve the problems in our community. Right. So we've got to have a two-edged sword dealing with it at the same time. And to your point in terms of what's happening around my neighborhood, the other problem is there's a lack of unity, collaboration, and concerted effort. I deal with it. I'm sure many other pastors across America deal with the fact that when you try to call black preachers together to deal with issues in their community,
what?
It's like pulling teeth.
Let's name them. Let's call them out. I'm here. We're here. Let's call them out. When we come back, I want to talk about what Reverend William Barber is doing around the country. I want to talk about Reverend Jim Wallace, who's been on this show a bunch of times. And I want to talk about how we can, again, as people, move in spite of, 866-801-8255. Pastor sticking around. First Lady's in the house. Cousin Syl is here. Not a whole lot of foolishness, but y'all could call up. We're here for it. If you want to bring some, 866-801-8255.
Might get the smoke, though.
Might get double time. Because I imagine you've been smoking longer than I have, Pastor. But since
I don't know.
I think you have been.